So in this lesson, we're going to talk about your perspective solution. So imagine that you're on the top of a mountain and you're standing on a tower and you look around you and you have a panoramic view of the trees that make up the forest. And below you see a river that's winding through the land. And you see a small town in the distance. And there's a lot much more in the distance. Now imagine yourself standing still and you take a sheet of paper and you roll it into a narrow tube where one end is wide enough to go over an eye and the other end narrows to a tiny little opening. Now close your left eye and look through the tube with your right eye. The town is there, the river is there, the trees that make up the forest are there, but you no longer have your normal panoramic view. Instead, you've closed an eye and looked at the world around you through a very narrow tube. So the lesson of this exercise is that it's what you don't see that's often important. Anger narrows perspective. The tunnel vision of anger is functional in physical threat situations. So it's part of nature's survival plan. And you're going to impede your survival if you watch a bird in flight while you're under attack. Parasitic anger presents a different picture. The danger is to your image, your belief, your personal rules, your expectations, and a lot more like your ego threats. So absorb yourself in this narrow world, and not much else is going to matter except satisfying the voracious appetite of this parasitic ego. When parasitic anger narrows your psychological perspective, you're going to have trouble seeing from another person's vantage point. And this loss of perspective is going to amplify your anger. And if you find yourself in this perspective narrowing trap, how do you ditch that tube? Well, deliberately, we need to look from different angles at what's going on. Put our cognitive behavioral tools to work, like our cognitive reappraisal or our ABCDE methods and our distancing techniques to help expand our perspective. So in this lesson, we're going to cover a couple of ways to broaden this perspective and see both the forest and the trees. So we're going to learn to recognize and break free from circular reasoning and overgeneralization traps. We're going to experiment with questions of inquiry and strategy to shift from parasitic anger to reality-based perspectives and free ourselves from parasitic anger by projecting these short-term and long-term results. We're also going to use humorous exaggeration to change our mood and distance ourselves from parasitic anger thinking. And we're going to understand the positive perspective triad and how it can help reduce anger and its harmful effects in our lives. So there's two classic constrictions on perspective. Anger problems and bitter feelings kind of amplify each other. So, even when you're intolerant of both, your perspective is going to narrow. So circular reasoning and overgeneralization are perspective narrowing experiences that help to propel that narrowing. So how do we free ourselves from these constraints? Circular reasoning is a logical fallacy where you're figuratively going around in circles. You're going to start out with one idea and then end up with a conclusion that's the same or as similar to the original idea. So, for example, I'm mad because you made me mad. Or I must have my way so that I won't get angry, and I won't get angry if I get my way. And some circular reasoning involves three nodes on the circle. So you have the primary premise, the secondary premise, and the conclusion. So the primary premise is, I'm entitled to get my way. The secondary premise is, why anger is necessary. Why would it be a necessary response to any frustration, where you're seeing yourself as thwarted? So the second premise is, it's an absolute disaster if I don't get my way. So the conclusion here, if I'm entitled to get my way and it's an absolute disaster if I don't get my way, then I must get my way. So we have to punch holes in this in any part of the process so that we can exit that circle. So we can add some because interventions to punch holes in the process. So your primary premise is, I'm entitled to get my way. So you ask yourself, because why? Then you might respond, well, because it's my birthright, or because I believe I'm special, and because I believe that I'm deserving. And then we can ask, what's the validity of that? And then your secondary premise is it's an absolute disaster if I don't. So then we can ask ourselves, because why? And we respond, because I can't stand feeling frustrated, because there's a universal law that all must accommodate me, and because the world will come to an end if I don't get my way. And your because answer also circles back to the primary premise. And then we can ask, what's the validity of that? So your conclusion is, I must get my way. And then we ask, because why? And then we respond, because it's my birthright, because I can't stand not having what I want, and because I'll get angry if I don't get my way. Again, your because answer circles back to that primary premise. And then we ask, what's the validity of that? This circular reasoning could have an unstated conclusion that's the very same as the premise. My life would be great if other people didn't mess with me, and because they messed with me, my life isn't great. And when this circle eludes your detection, you have an anger blind spot. And that blind spot is probably going to lead to extension of blame and to justify aggression. So catch yourself spinning in this circle, and this awareness may be enough for you to break free from the loop. Overgeneralizing, saying things like women are bad drivers, men are slobs. These examples, what do they have in common here? In single phrases, I pigeonholed both genders. So I'm demonstrating two overgeneralizations. So here's how it works with parasitic anger. You shout at your partner. Maybe it's something like, you're a worthless idiot. How do you get out of that overgeneralization trap? Is it just the word like bad or slob or idiot that, like, in the right context, that arouses anger? Well, if we probe a little bit deeper, we're going to see there is a common connection. The verb to be, it influences an outpouring of angry feelings. If a person is one way at this moment, one is likely to form a perspective of the individual as being that way in general. So Alfred Korzybecki, in 1933, the founder of a therapy approach called general semantics, he saw a danger in what he termed to be the is of identity. This single verb obliterated the complexity of a human being. So in this context, he saw the verb is as representing a primitive, restrictive, fallacious, unjustified evaluation. The more abstract the is of identity phrase, bad, good, pleasant, unpleasant, the higher the risk for misreading situations and for the excess tension that comes in the form of an unjustified is of identity evaluation. So character overgeneralizations like bad drivers, slobs, or worthless idiots, these are examples of extension of blame thinking. And these overgeneralizations are irrational and challengeable on numerous grounds. And they're like little weak opponents puffed up to look all powerful. So to sap these parasites of their power, we have to look for exceptions to the overgeneralizations. And normally we don't have to look very far. So NASCAR drivers like Danica Patrick and Tammy Jo Kirk really dispel the myth that women are bad drivers. And it's true, some men trash their living quarters, but the majority don't. So, how about the men that are compulsively clean? If your partner is a worthless idiot, then what does that say about your choice? Might you see your partner a little bit differently at a different time? So the general semantics professor David Borland and Paul Johnston in 1991 suggested using active verbs to the verb to be. So how we do this? It sounds something like, I don't like how some women drive, or I'd prefer that men disavowed sloppiness. So by defining what you don't like or what you would prefer, you shift the needless blame away from the other people. So at the same time, you're asserting your right to dislike what you don't like. Additionally, you're distancing yourself from character overgeneralizations and that extension of blame thinking. And communications with that verb to be are going to work fine most of the time. But when the is of identity helps drive parasitic anger patterns, intentionally eliminating the verb in special circumstances can promote a more objective perspective. So I'm going to give you an exercise that's going to help you to put this into practice. So blame labeling people with the is of identity labels only evokes and justifies angry feelings on your part as well as theirs. So instead of that, we're going to use E prime for stripping away a parasitic factor from your anger. So this shows you how to contrast approaches. So parasitic anger thinking, Jake is a complete idiot. But if we use E prime thinking, we say when Jake insults his boss, he acts foolishly. Most people are so well practiced in the is of identity thinking that it just comes naturally to them. But when we substitute the word act for is, it creates a different perspective in what the focus is on Jake's behavior rather than his identity. So making yourself aware of the is of identity process is challenging, but when you can slow the process, it's not going to be so challenging. One way to do this is to judge the acts. So I'm going to give you a chart that kind of contrasts an act perspective with an is of identity perspective. So the situation, you're looking forward to a quiet dinner at your favorite restaurant when a group of people sit at a chair beside you and they laugh and they speak loudly in celebration of somebody's birthday. So the is of identity perspective is these people are a bunch of illiterate loudmouths who should be drinking sulfuric acid soup. That'll really shut them up. So we have to look at the accuracy of the is of identity perspective. We have no evidence that everyone in the group always acts and thinks the same way. So you might put something down here like I muddle clarity and trouble myself when I categorize and extend blame for something I don't like. They came to the restaurant for a different purpose than I did. The act perspective is to look at it as I don't like the way this group acts. And so the accuracy of that would be I don't like loud conversations. They occupy themselves with their agenda and they're seemingly mindless of their surroundings, and I'd prefer that they dial down the volume. So you're going to do the same thing to strengthen your reasoning skills by moving from overgeneralizations and that is of identity thinking into evaluating the acts. What's the behavior? Pick a recent situation in which is of identity was an anger factor, and which perspective can you more easily verify? So you're going to put the situation, put what your is of identity perspective was, and then try to verify the accuracy of that, and then put your act perspective and verify the accuracy of that. When we view people in terms of their acts rather than their global being, we're likely going to be able to promote clarity in support of a more reasoned perspective. And your perspective and your options are going to broaden at that point. You're going to avoid your anger becoming the issue. And that in and of itself is a victory. We can also use the two-question technique. A well-worded question really contains the conditions for its answer. So we're going to look at some questions of inquiry and strategy. Questions of inquiry are the analytic phase of a two-part problem-solving process. Questions of strategy are about what to do. So when we have questions of inquiry questions are open-ended. They can include what, when, where, why, and how probes. A closed-ended question is usually only going to answer yes or no. But an open-ended question is going to give you a little bit more leeway. They can be particularly useful when we're probing for parasitic anger beliefs and any of the fallacies in those beliefs. So some sample questions of inquiry and some sample answers might be, like what would happen if anytime someone acted in a way I didn't like, I held the view that the person deserved to be firebombed by a drone. So, the answer here might be, if everyone at various times acted displeasingly and thereby deserved this punishment, nobody would go unpunished. And then another sample question would be, if I feel tense, uncomfortable, and angry for no visible reason, what's my purpose for blaming someone? So the answer here might be, misplaced blame serves the purpose of attributing a cause. So it's going to stir up animosity, whereas acceptance of unexplained reasons is an enlightened approach. For our purposes, these strategy questions here are going to piggyback on answers to our inquiry questions. The strategy questions are for eliciting reasonable action approaches to overcome a problem. So 2 sample questions of strategy and sample answers might be, when I don't like what someone says or doesn't do, what are my rational options? So 1, I can start by accepting the situation. 2, I can communicate what I don't like without being aggressive. 3, I'm going to focus on the problem and steer clear from personality issues. 4, I'm going to avoid the accusatory you, which sounds like I'm blaming and complaining. 5, if I hit a wall, I'm going to try a different way or just unblinkingly accept that you can't get through to everybody. Or a 6th option might be, if I discover an error in my actions, I'm going to act responsibly for that. And then a 7th response might be, if I need to take further steps, I'll take them. Another question would be like, how do I gain clarity when seemingly from out of the blue I feel tense or uncomfortable and angry? So maybe I'll just accept that tension and discomfort are signals, and there may be no visible answer as to the cause. Or I'll look for patterns. Or ask yourself, when has this happened before? Was there an observable cause? When the cause of the signal is unclear, rather than jumping to conclusions and arbitrarily blaming somebody, I'll just suspend my judgment until I have clarity or it's clear that my temporary mood and irritable state was the cause. So we can build questions of inquiry and strategy into an approach that's similar to the ABCDE process, but with a few different categories. So we're still going to have like the activating event and the belief, but instead of the consequence, we're going to have inquiry questions. And instead of the dispute, we're going to have just the strategy questions. And instead of the effect, we're going to have the outcome. So in this one, the event is, I can't locate a container of fast dry glue at a large warehouse store, and I can't find an employee available to help me. My belief here might be that management is stupid for not having enough staff available, and that the staff are lazy and don't do their job, and management should fire them, and they would if management were competent. So some inquiry questions we can ask here is, where is it written that store employees have to be available at my beck and call? And if I find no one available, where's the proof that all store employees are lazy? There is no proof there. Some strategy questions would be, what would I do if the store were completely self-service? Or can I find a checkout clerk to point me towards the product? Or where's the manager located so I can ask? So the outcome to the inquiry questions might be, it's preferable if an employee is available to help, but it's not the end of the world if there are none. Or I've made a correctable fundamental attribution error, and there's no proof that all employees are lazy. There is, however, proof that none are currently available. Some strategy answers would be, I'd look in the areas where I might find glue, such as craft. No luck. There's long lines at the checkout counter. No luck there. So in looking for a manager, I found a service area. I asked about the glue and was directed to an aisle. Short and long-term assessment of a parasitic anger situation is just a quick and simple thing that we can do to have a surprisingly effective change in how we're feeling. So we can look at a short and a long-term advantages of our parasitic anger thinking and the short and long-term advantages of challenging that thinking. Then we can make a choice. So an example here might be in the short term, we can get immediate relief from venting or striking out impulsively. But the advantages of challenging that thinking, we're going to learn and practice new ways to broaden and maintain a realistic perspective using our enlightened choices. We're going to avoid acting impulsively and possibly destructively. And we're going to widen our perspective and put realistic priorities about the matter into motion. And in the long term, well, there are no meaningful long-term advantages other than just the short-term rewards that repeat themselves. So the advantage of challenging that thinking would, we would have a superior sense of command over yourself when facing undesirable conditions. We're going to grow our ability to restrict and restrain that parasitic thinking. And we're going to have greater freedom to constructively express natural anger toward unfair situations and to do so proportionately. We're also going to have increased probability of avoiding prolonged periods of thinking negatively, which is called ruminating, or catastrophizing, like thinking everything's a disaster, or other unwanted effects like hammering away at my body with stress hormone surges and so on. It's a really good idea to ridicule yourself for parasitic anger thinking, but you might benefit from poking fun at these parasitic beliefs and ideals themselves. So let's suppose that you tried to sell your parasitic anger beliefs. So this is kind of a possible advertisement for it. Like 30 ways to add excitement to your life by demanding the impossible and following up with blame fests when you don't achieve it. Experience the stimulation of angering yourself as often as you wish. I mean, do we honestly think the idea would have broad appeal and sell? This humorous exaggeration, puts the worth of parasitic thinking into a different perspective. And these humorous exaggerations can put the parasitic anger demands and their extensions into this humorous perspective. So the blame belief here would be, you should always get what you expect, and those who stand in your way are going to have plenty to regret. Well, how do we pitch that? A demanding life is a place to be. There's no need to set yourself free. Parasitic anger is the key. So what's our expected result here? Selling parasitic anger views is a tough sell, especially since so many people create their own demons and they don't need any extra help. So it's your turn. You're going to try a humorous sales pitch. Write down one of your blame beliefs and then come up with a sales pitch and what your expected result of the sales pitch would be. Now we're going to look at the positive perspective triad that's composed of objective self-observation, confident composure, and realistic optimism to help us replace that parasitic anger perspective. So with objective self-observation, when you observe provocative experiences through objective lenses and turn those lenses inward on your thoughts and feelings, you're going to likely get a sharper focus on that elusive state we call reality. And if you know what the triggers and the signs and the causes of your anger are, or your self-observation is going to be able to replace that parasitic anger reaction with a reflective response. So accurate explanations can really help you quell any needless anger and reduce the problem to just the essentials. And you're going to be able to develop reasonable perspectives based on facts and reason and knowledge, and that's going to extend into effective actions. With confident composure, this is just a state of mind where you feel in charge of yourself and the controllable events around you. So with confident composure, you're recognizing that you can directly command only yourself, and you choose to do that. You don't demand that the world's changing for you because that's unrealistic. You're going to take life and situations as they are, and you're going to drive your actions with productive intentions. And you're going to allow yourself to live with the natural tensions that signal problems to solve, and that they're a normal part of this form of exploration. And with this flexible and stronger view, your psychological resources are more available to advance your enlightened self-interest. And you're going to gain confident composure skills by addressing needless anger and just selectively facing adversities that are harmful when they're avoided. So by recognizing and diffusing misguided anger thinking, you're less likely to waste your time with those distractions. And with realistic optimism, you believe that you're able to apply your talents and learn new ways to combat the parasitic anger now. And you're thinking like a realistic optimist. And a realistic optimist, you don't wait for things to happen. You create opportunities to increase positive experiences and reduce negative ones. And that's also positive. And you believe that you're reducing your parasitic anger because you're confident that you can build the necessary skills. So you ground that belief in objective observations or objective self-observations. You believe that by persisting, you're going to continue improving, and so you persist. And that's realistic optimism. As a realistic optimist, you're more inclined than most to cope proactively. And proactive coping is where you're anticipating an upcoming stressor. So you seize that opportunity to prepare yourself for the event and possibly avert it. And aspiring for a positive future and setting the stage to successfully achieve positive future goals is associated with your emotional well-being. So proactive coping is about reducing negatives and increasing positives. And that's a useful tool for the realistic optimist toolbox. Don't forget to complete your progress log. What 3 things have you picked up from this group that you found helpful? What 3 steps would you take to move closer to overcoming your anger excesses? What are you going to do to execute the steps? What do you hope to learn or have reinforced by taking these steps? And if you would make the changes in the process, what would you do differently next time?